Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is one of my two African nightcrawler worm buckets, and these two yellow worm buckets, here's bucket one and bucket number two is right here on standby to get fed after we take care of bucket number one. These systems have been in service for, well, let me show you my stats, and I took sort of a shorthand approach to bringing the information down here, so I'll give you a moment to see if you can decipher what each of these little bits of information mean. So if you want to pause to figure it out, do so now, but I'm going to proceed with explaining what all this means. Number one, probably the most obvious, is the age of the systems, 309 days of age. And then these two numbers here represent the times we fed these systems. So the reason bucket number one has 4 more feedings than bucket number two was because over in bucket number two we did a set it and forget it test for a number of weeks, during which time bucket number one here was getting fed and bucket number two was not. So bucket number two is a little bit behind on feedings. The number here, I bet you most of you know, is 11 days since that last check-in and feeding, when they received feedings 28 and 24. So today we're going to give them feedings 29 and 25. And we're going to follow the same theme that we've been following, which is to give them dry stuff. I've got some breadcrumbs over here, and then I've got my worm chow over here. So that's what we're planning for the food. And now on the end here, with the big asterisk, or what looks like an asterisk, it's actually a representation of a fan. A little fan that's been blowing onto these systems now for 31 days. Well, that's not entirely true. I set the fan up 31 days ago, but there was a 2-day break when no fan activity was going. The reason for that was that I fed in such a way that I thought that the food was placed kind of close to the surface, and I wanted the material near the surface to remain a little bit more damp and inviting so that the worms could nip off that food. And then after a couple days I did resume activity on the fan so that it can continue to help dry these systems. And man, I tell you, this material out here on the surface has become very dry. I'm almost wondering if now, after 31/29 days, perhaps we can cease the use of the fan. Another idea that we've kicked around here in these systems was to possibly transfer their contents over into some bus bins so that the material can have a nice large top surface through which its moisture content could be lost or freed to evaporation. But since the fan seemed like it was doing a pretty good job drying the material on the top surface, we opted to just stick with the fan and see where it leads us. And I must admit, I do like the way the material, even down low, has this much more crumbly consistency now. It doesn't feel muddy, it doesn't feel like it all wants to hold together. Even the stuff that I'm bringing up to the surface from the very bottom seems to have just about the right consistency. And don't forget, all this dry stuff that we're submerging now, it's going to start absorbing moisture into itself as it gets blended in, or after it gets blended in. So I'm wondering if now would be a good time to just shut the fan off and let the systems continue as is. Leave them uncovered, but not try to promote drying using the fan anymore. I think that's what I'm going to do. I think we're going to turn off the fan. I mean, I bought these systems up onto the bench, but I did leave the fan running with the assumption that I'd be returning these systems to sit out in front of the fan and continue to get blown on. But if what we see in bucket number two is anything like what we're seeing here in bucket number one, I think our experiment with trying to dry the systems with the fan will pretty much come to an end. Yeah, you know, I think with all this dry material out on the top surface, probably a good ½ inch or almost an inch of it now getting all blended in and combined with the more damp stuff below, I believe is going to drastically reduce the moisture content of these systems to the point where we to where we want it, you know, basically. So perhaps now that the fan's going to get turned off, we don't have to worry so much about submerging their food as deep as we've been doing lately, so that it can stay down in a damp spot where the worm traffic can be counted on. So let's sprinkle in a little bit of this, a little bit of that. This is the breadcrumbs. And, well, let's not forget, what we're giving them now is also more dry stuff getting blended into the material down low, the dry foods. This is the worm chow. And then I guess we can level off. Some of the stuff that's out on the surface definitely is hard. You know, when the stuff dries, this casting material, if it's clumped together and dries that way, it almost turns into like a little rock. So I do believe that a few more check-ins of blending this stuff together to combine the dry with the damp is going to continue to help. But let's bring bucket number 2 over and give it the same treatment here. I guess it's fair to assume that what we see down in bucket number 2 is going to be very similar to what we just encountered in bucket number 1, so perhaps we won't go at it with so much curiosity and exploration in mind, but rather more in the mindset of reproducing what we just did in bucket number 1. You might notice that I am kind of going to the extra effort of trying to bring material up from the very bottom, something I've not done very much in these systems over their lifetimes. I guess partially because in the beginning they were quite deep, a little bit deeper than this, and doing so was tricky. Not to mention everything was kind of damp and unwieldy, but now that the stuff is a little bit more flowing, free-flowing and crumbly, doing this is a little bit easier. So I guess my first aim is just going to be to bring up the damp and submerge the dry, combine everything as best I can, and then we'll sprinkle in their feeding of dry foods, and that'll pretty much be our check-in with these systems. My main reason for wanting to get the moisture level in these down to achieve a consistency that enables the stuff to crumble a little bit better is because I would like to bring these systems to an end one of these days soon. And whether I'm going to want to screen the material to separate the worms from their castings or what, I don't know. If we wanted to migrate the worms, then we would definitely be transferring these buckets' contents over into bus bins, where a migration type approach would be much more easily done, but I'm still not sure. I'm not sure how it's going to be managed. So let's drop in their portion of breadcrumbs, their portion of worm chow, and that'll be it. And as I've alluded to already now a couple times, I'm going to go over there when I return these buckets to their position, their storage space over on the side of my wormery. I'm going to go over there and turn off the fan. So I think we're going to treat the fan drying experiment as a success, because it does work, clearly, but it's got strings attached. You know, you're going to end up with kind of hard little boulders that will eventually need to get blended in so they could get rehydrated and crumble again and fall apart. And especially when you're doing them in a deeper container like this, the other strings attached is the amount of time it takes. You know, the air's got to come in here, it's got to swirl around, it's got to kick out the more damp, humid air, and it does seem like promoting the drying in this way is a little bit more time consuming than other ways, but it works. So let's leave it at that. That's it for our check-in with the now 309-day African nightcrawler yellow buckets. Doing really nice in here, and I think some of the next steps coming up soon is going to be getting these little guys geared up for being moved out of these buckets and moved into some new fresh locations to continue work elsewhere. So that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.